questioning is perhaps the greatest gift we have as human beings.
Science is more than a body of knowledge. It's a way of thinking.
It's a way of thinking that teaches us to question everything we think we know.
Science came about by developing techniques, methodologies for gaining reliable knowledge about the world.
We have at our fingertips the technologies that were only possible for the largest governments and corporations 20 years ago as an individual today.
If the human civilization continued at anything remotely like the current pace of technology advancement for 1 million years, where would we be? I think we're either extinct or on a lot of planets.
The good thing about science is that it's true whether or not you believe in it.
We hold the scientific method in high regard because it works. If it stopped working, we'd throw it out.
Discover the past.
Create the future.
This is the Here and How podcast.
Welcome to the Here and How podcast, where every week we dive deep into big ideas, exploring the past so that we can create a brighter future together. I'm your host, Thomas Westbrook, and I'm joined by my two magnificent co-hosts, Stephen Woodford and Rachel Oates. Say hi, guys.
Hi, guys.
Hey, guys.
We're going to be talking on this episode about memory and how the memory works. At least I think, if I remember correctly.
Say again?
What?
Say again?
I don't quite remember what we're talking about. No,
oh, dear.
I wanted to start this episode off by asking both of you, what book in your life influenced you the most?
Say again? Sorry. Do you want to go first, Rachel? You're more of an avid reader than myself.
Oh, God, this is really tough. It's really hard to pick just one.
It's like I had a favorite book, but then I forgot. I don't remember.
My favorite is God Is Not Great by Christopher Hitchens. And it's not so much that the book's very well written, although it is, or that it's a good book, although it is. It's more to do with the time I read it and my mentality at that time and what it did for me. So that's why I remember that book for being the most important.
And Rachel?
That's sweet. I would potentially argue maybe like Jane Eyre, because I read it when I was like 16, maybe 17, and I just have really good like memories of being in sixth form at that time, and also my English lit class. Like, I didn't read it for English lit, but I read it around the time we were studying other books, and I know that I just have good memories there, but also it changed my opinion on the classics, and I didn't just see them as like dry and boring and outdated anymore. Like, Jane Eyre was the book that kind of changed my opinion on classics and made me see how they can be exciting and romantic, and like you can have these amazing strong female characters. They're not all these like shy little wallflowers who are just like me. So
well, I'm curious if either of you can remember the opening line or the closing line from either of the books that were the most influential in your lives.
Rita, I married him.
Really?
Mm-hmm. What else? Sorry, go on.
No, you carry on with yours. I'll add after.
No, you go ahead. The opening.
We're too British.
The opening scene, at least from Jane Eyre, is her being like a kid, or at least one of the earliest scenes, is her being like a kid, and she's locked in a room at her, I think it's her aunt's house or a stepmother or something, and it's the red room, and it's like this creepy, like, it's very like gothic and scary, and it just kind of like gets in your head a little bit. But no, the ending with the whole like Rita, I married him, it's quite nice, I think.
It's nice.
Yeah.
For me, there's two that stick out. One was to do with be aware of the irrational, however seductive. Actually, there's three. Another was the grave will supply plenty of time for silence. And the third was take the risk of thinking for yourself. Much more happiness, truth, beauty, and wisdom will come to you that way. So I remember those quite clearly.
But are any of those the very first opening line or the closing line?
I think Rita, I married him is the closing line. I think.
You think? Do you know? Do you remember?
Not 100%.
What percentage, if I were to quiz you through, and the reason that I'm diving into this is because I read a lot of books, but then when I might glean some different concepts and kind of tie different concepts with other concepts. But if you were to ask me to go back through and tell you what a particular chapter started with, or you know, even the titles of the chapters, or even some of the less deep concepts in some of the most influential books in my life, I probably couldn't tell you.
I love that quote about reading that's like, it's something like, I remember no more the books I've read than the meals I've eaten, even so they've made me who I am.
Yeah.
That one.
Yeah.
I love
Exactly.
that.
Yeah.
It's like you don't necessarily need to remember every single detail, every single word, every single line, as long as you can kind of like, I guess, remember the gist of some. It's the fact that you've read them and they made you who you are, and even if you don't,
it shapes your thinking.
Exactly, yeah. Even if you don't recognize the influence they've had on you, they have had an influence, and there'll be times when something you've read will come back to you, or it'll encourage you to do one thing or another, even if it's not a conscious decision or a conscious memory of it, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry.
The most
rambling.
influential book in my life, I would have to say, it's called Moonwalking with Einstein by Josh Foer.
Cool.
And I read this book probably around maybe my junior year in college, and it completely shifted the way that I look at learning, at intelligence, and at memory. And so I want to talk about, throughout the course of this podcast, I want to talk about a lot of the concepts that he discloses in this book. And I also want to look a little bit at the history of memory and some different misconceptions. Hopefully we'll have enough time to cover all of it.
Sounds good.
So the first aspect that is the history of memory. Do you guys think that human memories have gotten better or worse in the last 2,000 years?
Ooh.
2000?
I'd imagine probably better, because people are kind of like more aware of it now and trying to remember more. But I guess actually you could argue worse, because we're living longer. So as memory deteriorates with age, I don't know is the answer.
I would say yes. And it's not genetically based, it's to do with environment. So for example, IQ has went up substantially in the last century. We haven't evolved. There's nothing going on. It's to do with culture and context and the way in which we live our lives. I suspect because we put such an emphasis on memory on our own children that it is having an effect. We're moldable when we're young. So I suspect, it's probably increasing.
We do start encouraging kids a lot earlier than we used to, and for a lot longer than we used to.
Yeah.
You might want to brace yourselves for the answer then.
Oh no.
Bring it on.
So the history of memory is actually quite fascinating, because if you go back to ancient Greece, this concept of really investing in your memory and using certain techniques and tactics to remember large quantities of information was much more commonplace than it is today. So there's a really famous story of a poet named Simonides, who he went to this banquet, and while he was in there, back in the day, you would hire, a poet as your entertainment rather than, a DJ or something that you might today. But this poet, he delivers his poem, and then he goes out into, the outside area to get some fresh air. And there's this earthquake, the palace collapses and kills everyone inside, to the point where the bodies are mangled beyond recognition. The poet stops and he closes his eyes, and he's able to reimagine the palace, the way that everything is laid out, where different people are seated. And he's able to use this visual spatial memory to take different family members to where their loved ones passed away and identify the bodies and say where different people were seated and whatnot. This is kind of the origin of this notion of the memory palace, which I'm going to get into a little bit more as to what that technique is in a moment. But first, I want to kind of talk about why the Greeks had such good memories, why they were such masters at, reciting entire massive epic poems like the Iliad and the Odysseys directly from memory. And a large part of it happens to do with the fact that they didn't have books, they didn't have the internet to the extent that we do today. There wasn't a printing press that made hundreds of copies of manuscripts and books and texts. You had a couple of handwritten papyrus, and you had different bards that would pass down, tales from one generation to the next, and you would have to learn it through, meter and rhyme and different tones and singing or different techniques. And I'll cover what some of the techniques are in a minute. But this notion of really honing in and perfecting your memory was heavily valued. And even the thought of outsourcing our memories to put it in writing, Socrates historically really rails against this notion of writing because he thought that people would become like empty vessels. You would just put all your memories down and then you wouldn't really care to focus on honing your memory and that element of who you are.
Do you think that's kind of happened today? Like where people spend so long like throwing everything down on social media that they never really like stop to actually reminisce and think back over things.
Oh yeah, you also get it in academics, to be honest with you. Like you get people that can retain an enormous amount of information, but if you push them to say what they personally think on the subject, a lot of them will break. As in, they won't have an answer, they won't really, you can tell that they haven't really thought about it, which means that they're retaining knowledge, like an empty vessel, essentially, but they're not really digesting it and utilizing the value that was in it. I was just thinking about Socrates. The irony is that we know about him because he was written down by Aristotle.
Yeah, it is very ironic.
Yeah. Well,
there was one study.
Oh,
go ahead, Rachel.
Oh no, I was just going to say, well, I actually went to school with a girl who, she had a great memory. She was very good at just kind of regurgitating facts, and it served her very, very well up until like GCSEs, and you know, she was like A stars in everything, and like, but you asked her about like her opinion on anything, and she just didn't have one. Like years later, I met up with her again, and she just no opinions on anything. And interestingly, she went into languages, and she does like translation stuff because, you know, you understand the grammar and the rules, and you remember the vocab, and you're kind of there, really.
You don't have to think critically.
Yeah, I found it quite interesting. But you know,
there's definitely other aspects of intelligence that besides just sheer memory that are important. But there was a study that was taken where, and I'll put the link in the show notes, where basically researchers told their subjects that they would be able to, or they told some subjects that they would be able to recall information later or retrieve information later from the internet. And then they asked them later on if they could remember it. And the ones that were told that they could retrieve it actually remembered less than the ones that thought that they couldn't retrieve it later and that they, you know, had to memorize it themselves.
It doesn't surprise
me. And so
me
just
at all.
the sheer thought, the sheer knowledge that, oh, hey, this information, I can always look it up on my smartphone later. I can always pull it up on the internet. You're less likely to really focus in and try to retain it because the thought of memorizing it is less valuable, less important.
It's not needed, is it? Because, for example, if I wanted to convey to you facts about like the last episode to do with, say, Neanderthalensis, it takes a significant amount of time and resources to be able to retain that knowledge correctly. Whereas I could spend that time searching up 3 other hominid species and just note down the facts. So get to a point where I'm like, that is correct. I'm happy, done. I won't be able to retain it, but the utility of my time is better spent considering that I have the capacity to note things down and to recall it whenever I need it.
And we're surrounded by so much information that we have to kind of be selective with, you know, where are we going to focus our attention?
Exactly.
I just remember being back at school, and I had this chemistry teacher who, like, she turned around to us one day and was like, "Oh, you guys have it so easy. When I was at school, we had to like memorize the periodic table and do this and do this." And she had this little like song where she'd remember the elements and she'd like reel them off and stuff. But then in other lessons, she'd turn around and be like, "Oh, you guys are doing this already. I didn't do this until like, you know, A level or like first year of my degree or whatever." And I was a bit like, she didn't kind of quite put it together that like, I guess because we didn't have to spend as long just memorizing facts, we could kind of move quicker through other bits of the curriculum. So I think there's definitely kind of like, what's the word I'm looking for? Like,
that mentality that she had is very much the harder it is, the better it is, which is a mentality that's in a lot of people a generation or two above us.
I'm trying to say there's sort of like a trade-off. That's what I'm trying to say. There's like a trade-off between like how much you memorize and how much you understand. And it's like if you do just spend your time memorizing facts, then you don't necessarily just understand them and you don't necessarily get onto the kind of more complex stuff. But at the same time, like if you can't memorize some bits, then how are you ever supposed to understand some of the complex stuff? So you've got to kind of like proper balance it out. That was what I was trying to say.
Yeah.
Good point.
Yeah.
For sure. And I'm going to kind of look into that, but there's a really interesting notion called the paradox of learning that's directly tied into that. And that's that you have to know things in order to learn more. So if I give you a bunch of equations on a board and they're all a bunch of, crazy chemistry equations, and you don't know what any of the letters stand for, you've never taken chemistry in your life, you don't have the very basic understanding as to what any of this is, you won't retain any of it. There's nothing you don't even have the groundwork, the fundamentals to latch any of this new information to hook it into. Whereas if you studied chemistry your whole life and you have a PhD in the field and you know what each one of these things mean, even if you see a brand new equation, you'll know what it's talking about. You'll be able to learn more stuff much quicker. So it's like the rich get richer.
Yeah, that paradox is interesting. One of the most important things I learned was to be able to read the language that's used on Wikipedia. Because as soon as I got myself to a standard at which I understood the vocabulary to that extent, all of a sudden, all information was accessible to me. But until then, it was very hard to read a wiki article because I didn't understand the words.
It's the same way with scientific, higher level scientific journals. Like I'm still trying to develop the vocabulary to read certain journal articles depending on the field. It can be very difficult.
It is very difficult. It's quite. I think they're shooting themselves in the foot, to be honest with you, because the point should be to communicate. But I've seen in those journals that they use keys and acronyms when they are absolutely not needed, just because. And it's like, can you not? I want to be able to read what's being said.
Part of that is they're not writing for the layman, and it is much easier to understand if you're in that field and you're so immersed in it. Then it's true. It is, rather than being like the muscle right next to your elbow. It's like, well, they have specific terms that within that field it is better communication. It's just not better for the layman.
No, stuff like that I have no problem with. I'm trying to think of a better example. There might be just 2 mentions of a certain term. It might be like ischemic heart disease in dogs, just something completely like that. And instead of mentioning that twice, they will have an acronym and reference it for the key.
Acronym?
Is it acronym? Acronym is where you have a capital letter for each one, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Was I saying it wrong?
No.
Yeah, I think.
Acronym.
Did you say acronym or acronym?
I was saying acronym.
Oh, no, acronym.
So.
Yeah. What am I saying wrong? Let me know.
Acronym.
Acronym.
Yeah,
not
it's
rim.
got the nim at the end, which is kind of like name. Think like acrostic name. Acronym.
Got you.
Yeah.
I find this in a couple of words. I use them. I know them. But I want to say it's to do with the region I'm in, but I don't know. Fair. Strange. I've noticed it on a few.
I'm terrible for pronouncing things wrong, so don't worry about it.
Yeah. I can definitely see how it can be challenging. But I don't want to dwell too much on that for the rest of the podcast. Like, I want to look at not just all memory in general, but I want to hone into kind of show that there's different types of memory and then focus in on one of them. So we have short-term and long-term memory. Most people are aware of this. Short-term is kind of your working memory. You can retain a certain amount of things in your head at once. And, if you say it over and over in your head, maybe for about 30 seconds, you can kind of hang on to something. But then as soon as you shift your focus, it disappears. It's like, where to go? But then you can also solidify something into long-term memory. There's 2 different types of long-term memories. There's declarative or explicit memories, which are things like facts and, dates and events and episodic and semantic things. And then there are non-declarative memories, or implicit memories, which are things like skills and habits, like muscle memory, how to ride a bike. You have to kind of focus on it at first, and then it becomes like second nature. It's like how to get to the grocery store, to turn left, turn right, and whatnot. And these are actually accounted for in different regions of our brain. So in the 1900s, there was a guy named Henry Molaison, or HM, and he was suffering from seizures. So doctors went in and had this surgery that removed his hippocampus, where a lot of the seizures were happening, as well as part of his amygdala. And they found that as a result of it, he suffered from severe anterograde amnesia. So he lost all these memories, and he also lost the ability to form new memories. But this is where it gets kind of interesting. is he was still able to form non-declarative long-term memories. So he was still able to learn how to walk to the dining hall and stuff and undergo tasks. He could do things like trace out certain drawings, and over time he would get better and improve at the skill, even if he didn't remember doing it before. So like the muscle memories and, non-declarative or implicit memories actually were still able to be formed, even though he couldn't possess the ability to form long-term memories of events and facts. And he also still possessed a short-term memory. So scientists started to realize that these are actually different types of memories that are formed in different parts of the brain. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, yeah.
Which one do you think we're going to focus on today?
Long-term?
Yep. We're going to hone in on the long-term memory of like facts and events. So if someone is trying to study for a test or to remember some list of things, hopefully this podcast is going to be able to help them. How does memory work? Is it like a video that you see something and you take it all in and you retain it and then you can just pull it back out of nowhere and it stays exactly the same? Or have you guys studied memory much in the past?
I've done little bits. It was never something I focused on too much, but it's kind of to do with like sort of connections being made between neurons, right? And the problem is that when you kind of recall a memory or relive it, you change it slightly, even if you don't mean to, which means that memories can kind of, they can be unreliable.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Memories
you can also
change.
Hallucinate.
Yeah. But memories do change upon recall. And because it is, it's chemistry based, it's not this completely permanent solid state thing that can never be altered. When the act of remembering something actually slightly changes it. So you can have false memories that are implanted in your brain. And there's been work by both Dr. Julia Shaw and Dr. Elizabeth Loftus that have shown that people not only can develop false memories, but they can be implanted. You can convince someone that they had a memory that they didn't actually have.
Have you seen people being convicted on admitting that they committed crimes that they didn't because pretty much such techniques were used to coerce them, although coerce is probably the wrong word here, to making them think that they had done something that they didn't.
They stand there and they're like, oh, you did this, didn't you? And you did this, and then you got the knife, and then you did this. And if they say that over and over enough, and they're putting stress on them, people are like, yeah, I think I did do that. And it's horrible, but...
it's really bad, bad. And especially when you're doing it on young people or people that are impressionable and people that just want to get out. Like after like 15 hours of interrogation, although they're only going to show you the minute where they admit that they did something, of people hammering, people that know what they're doing, hammering someone and going over a topic and really trying to add details and get them to elaborate on details that they didn't even know, etc. You totally can not only get a false confession, you can also plant memories that didn't happen.
Another huge aspect of that is that every year there are, I don't know the exact numbers, but eyewitness testimony in court is taken very seriously, and yet eyewitness testimonies are not reliable. And there's an entire organization called the Innocence Project, and what they do is they go through and they'll find people oftentimes on death row who have been wrongfully convicted, usually based off of something like eyewitness testimony. And then they'll go through and they'll take, now that there's like maybe genetic, we have DNA evidence, which is far more reliable, and they'll exonerate people and they'll show that they didn't actually commit the crime.
Was that the team that basically got Stephen Avery freed?
I'm not sure.
I think they did. I think they also worked with the Staircase incident, which is a documentary on Netflix to do with can't remember his name, something Peterson, who was, it seems, falsely accused of murder.
Oh, that was one with his wife, wasn't it?
Yeah, they're both interesting cases. I mean, the point that the documentaries are making, they're not made by the same people, but I think they have similar involvements, is that there isn't sufficient reason to lock these people up. There might be now with Stephen Avery because of the conditions, the hard evidence they found with him murdering someone. But the point being is that they were just showing that things weren't the way that they seemed. And in relation to memory, they had Brendan Avery, who is somebody who has a maybe 90, 80 IQ, really not that smart, and 15 hours they managed to plant, basically got him to admit things that he didn't do, and he remembered things that he didn't really remember. So it kind of ties into this.
Yeah.
I mean, so often now because I have really vivid dreams at night, and they like feel like they're real. And so often I have to be like, Dan, did we ever do this, or did I dream it? And half the time it's something that hasn't happened. So I can completely understand how like like false memories can be implanted in someone if I can do it to myself that easily.
Yeah, exactly. Something to do with dreams, actually. How does this work? I don't know if you know, Thomas. I wake up, I've had a dream, I remember it incredibly vividly. Hour later, can't remember fuck all. It's completely gone. What's going on there? That's fascinating.
I think a large part of it is that our brains tend to they tend, you have a million things that are going on all around you at once. And so you have to decide, you have to be selective. What are you going to focus on? So if I ask you right now, what does your kneecap feel like? You're going to focus in on your kneecap. Whereas before, you were completely oblivious to everything that was happening on your kneecap.
Yeah.
Unless there was some extreme pain or something, or some tickle or something, then you probably weren't even thinking about it. Whereas there's all these things going on around you right now. It might be background noise. It might be traffic. It might be a fan. It might be, the angle of certain light hitting certain shadows in the room that you're not even focused on. But your brain, in order to process all of this information, this overload of information that our senses are picking up, our brains get very specialized and focused on what should be remembered and what needs to be forgotten so that we can better store our memories and access them easily later. So when you have something that's really important, our brains focus in on those details and they're able to attach significance to it and attach emotional significance and then attach it to certain other senses that we're taking in, the smell of it, the taste of it, the look of it, the feel of it, whereas something that's not memorable, in order to function, our brains just say that's not important and it kind of files it away and doesn't really remember.
Makes sense.
Yeah, so if it's a dream and you're like, oh, that's not real, that didn't happen, our brains are really good at saying, oh, well, I don't need to focus on that.
It's also evolutionary, very good thing that you do forget things that happened in a dream because they don't correlate with reality. So I've had dreams where I've had an argument with someone. I had one where I woke up and I remembered it vividly all day. I did not like the person at all. Really was not happy with them. And I knew it was completely because of a dream. And I was just like, could this please, can my brain forget this? Because I can't. I'm holding a grudge against someone who didn't do anything. I did it to myself in my sleep.
Well, imagine too if we vividly remembered every single time that someone in our lives upset us. Imagine right now, how you would treat your parents, because I'm sure that all of us have had arguments with our parents where we didn't get along or we felt wronged or we were frustrated. And imagine if we held on to those memories and were never able to forget and move forward. It's extremely advantageous for social circles and society to be able to forget.
Yeah, that's true.
Even now, sometimes my mum will be like, oh, remember when you were so-and-so age, like a toddler or something. It was like, you had a strop in the co-op because you couldn't do something. And then suddenly I'll have a memory of it, a really vague one, and be like, yeah, that did make me angry. And I'll suddenly have a little bit of resentment with my parents from 20 years ago.
I've got one for you. I have memories that I'm not sure are memories. I'm not sure if I've planted them myself. So I've seen photographs of me being young, and then I can recall being young in those circumstances with those people. But really, I don't know if I can remember that. I don't know if this is my mind,
or if it's a photo,
or whether or not it's real. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So there are memories I have where I'm really unsure on whether or not that is a memory, or whether or not it's just a made up projection that I've based on
those. I have a really vivid one of having this it's this little green and white sort of almost like a kind of tricycle thing, but it didn't have pedals. You push along on your feet, and I was a really, really tiny kid, and I have a really vivid memory of going up and down my parents' front hallway on it. And for forever, I thought this was a real memory. It was definitely real. And then I saw a photograph in my parents' house of me on this little push bike thing in the hallway, and I'm like, what if I'm just remembering seeing the photograph and making it up? And it messes me up because I don't know if it's real or not.
Yeah. So there's Have either of you heard of the Satanic Panic?
No.
No.
In the 1980s, there was this surge in the United States of basically people who thought that there was this satanic ritual abuse going throughout the school systems in the US. And so there were these court cases over teachers who had apparently had these satanic sacrifices in tunnels underground in the schools, and that they had sacrificed animals and abused children. And
what the fuck?
Even though there was no evidence to support this, and even though they were, able to go to the schools and they searched and there's no tunnels and stuff, there was this notion that psychologists could somehow retrieve lost memories in children by, they talked to them about this over and over. But what they found was that the psychologists were actually planting false memories in the children, that the children were confabulating memories that didn't actually happen. But there was, for a long time, there was this massive surge where people were terrified that there were all these satanic ritual abuse cults that then the evidence showed didn't exist at all.
I was,
so we have to be careful with our memories.
Yeah.
When you hear stories of like kids who have memories of a past life and and the parents are all like, oh, they couldn't have picked it up from anywhere else. He has intense knowledge of how to put a gun together, or she has these like really intense memories of being in Japan and she's never been to Japan. I'm like, well, maybe she like saw a glimpse of something on an advert once and like
or on TV.
I don't know. I feel like there are so many more like logical, rational explanations than past lives.
It's essentially an argument from ignorance, isn't it? It's like, I don't understand how this person... First of all, it's confirmation bias. It's an interpretation of an event. They're saying it wrong because, ironically, they're remembering it wrong. And there's just so many factors involved. It's just... I remember my driving instructor, she believed in reincarnation. She was adamant that she used to be a whale. But she was quite thin, so I didn't think that she she was adamant that she was a whale, and she said that she even felt the location of where she was a whale, and
the location.
The echolocation. I've experienced people.
She was really comfortable in a bath.
Wow. So now that we've kind of studied a little bit about how memory works and the history of memory, I want to talk about some of the ways that we look at memory in the wrong way, we look at anomalies. Like, have you seen the movie Rain Man by Dustin Hoffman?
Yeah, good film.
Not.
It's a good film. Definitely check it out.
Basically, it's this guy who he is a savant and he's able to just remember everything that he sees, and he can read through phone books and just remember the names and the phone numbers and the addresses of everyone in the book. And it's based on an actual person named Kim Peek. And this guy, he actually does have an insane memory like that. The problem is that oftentimes savants like this who have these types of abilities, it's usually coupled with some type of abnormality or disability. So they may be autistic and they can remember a massive amount of information, but because their brain is taking in so much, it's not able to filter out what's important. And so they have really, really difficult times developing social skills and interacting with people. Another example of this, it doesn't necessarily overlap with autism, but synesthesia. If you have kind of a cross-wiring of the senses, then you can start seeing, certain like colors associated with numbers, or seeing shapes, associated with, sounds and stuff like that.
I've got something fascinating on synesthesia. Whenever I'm high, I say whenever, but on occasions when I'm high, I think I get that, but I don't get it normally. I don't know if that's possible, but I see colors in music and numbers in it's a very strange feeling.
That's cool.
Yeah. But with most people, though, we're not like that. We're not able to just soak up everything. But the positive side is that we also, with most people, we don't carry the social disabilities that often accompany being a savant. And our average working memory, how many things do you think you can hold in your working memory at a time? Like if I give you a list of like 10 items or 100 items or 7 items or 1,000 items, how many do you think you can remember if you just see like a certain number of random numbers or random names at a time?
I don't have a great short-term memory.
they're different as well. Names are going to be harder than numbers, just due to the fact that I have more association with numbers than I do with certain names. If you ask me to remember 5 English names, John, Steve, Thomas, whatever, it's easier than if you was to say, can you remember 5 Middle Eastern names? Much easier for me, because I don't have associations or memory with them.
Well, what do you think kind of the average is? If I just give you a list of objects that, maybe you're familiar with, but
like
they're not
12?
like... Okay, 12?
I reckon
Steve?
maybe a bit lower, 10.
10?
Is
Steve's
me-
closer.
Oh, really?
Woo!
It's the average is 7 plus or minus 2
Oh,
working
okay.
items that we can hold in memory.
Wow.
Okay.
Now, there
Isn't
are
it
ways that
easier
you
if
can
you group
increase
things
it.
into like 3s?
Yeah, there's some techniques that work very well.
Sorry,
And
I don't want to
I'm
get
going to
ahead.
dive into the techniques in a second, but
Okay.
do you think that we can improve our memories?
Yes.
Yes.
So you'll see like these apps that say like, just do this app 30 minutes a day and you'll have like the memory of a god. Do you think that those work?
Yeah, I think they're based on some objective evidence. Yeah, I think.
So if you
Whether
do
or
like
not-
100 crossword puzzles a day, you'll have a more elastic brain.
Well,
I
100
don't know.
100
Sorry.
crossword puzzles a day is going to make it so that you're really good at cross puzzles.
Exactly.
But teaching someone a technique for memory, which could be associating certain objects with one of your fingers. I don't know what techniques they use, but I know there's some that you can use. They've been proven to be quite effective. And the people that can remember a hell of a lot do use techniques of that ilk.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Rachel, what do you think?
Yeah, I think like you have to have specific techniques for learning specific things. So like, someone like Darren Brown, who taught himself to like memorize the order of cards really quickly. Like he has specific techniques for learning how to memorize cards, which probably wouldn't help you if you were trying to memorize like, 20 painters or something like that, like from a list. So I think, there's different techniques for different things, but I think it is possible.
Okay. Yeah. If I were to ask you guys right now that there's a name that I want you to remember, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And it's, the next person that you run into at a party or a social gathering, you have to remember their name. Most of the time when you meet people, do you remember their name on the first go? Like most of the time? If you go into a room and there's 10 people and they all say their name, like a lot of times people say, I'm not very good at remembering names because they go in those circumstances and they don't remember a single one.
Yeah, no, I'm terrible
If
with names.
there's 10 people, I'm not going to remember their names. But again, if
I'm
their
way more
names
visual.
are... Yeah, if their names are something I've heard before, like Hannah, I'm going to remember it more than, I don't know, some other name.
But even if like the name was like Lulakadurgadur or Schlurp or whatever, some interesting sounding weird, Well, but maybe it's something that just kind of, it doesn't really click with you.
I've already forgot it.
If I were to offer...
All I know is it was the something. I remember the person, but not the name.
If I were to offer you, though, let's say that I said, I will give you £1 million. I would say dollars, but you don't understand what those are because you're British.
We do. Patreon pays me in dollars.
Okay. So I'll give you $1 million. This is non-Brexit money. If you guys are able to remember the name of the next person that you encounter, could you do it then?
Yes.
What techniques would you use? What techniques would you use to make sure that you're not going to forget someone's name?
I would use...
You can't, aside from writing it down, you can't write it down or put it in your phone or something. You just have to remember it.
Mine is a little bit nerdy, but I'd put it into a song and make so it rhymes with something.
Nice.
Okay.
Because I always remember that. So like I take like a really popular song or like a nursery rhyme or something and then put their name in that and then have it rhyme with something and make it really silly.
I would use the "it's £1 million, don't forget the fucking name" technique. And I would just make sure that I remember. I would cheat. I'd write it down. But really, depending, how would I do it? I don't know. Actually, I've not been in a position like it.
like so many times I put things into little songs in my head because I remember tunes quite easily. Like I'm not musical at all, but I remember tunes. So like if I had like I don't know, like in an exam or something, if you had like a list of 7 things to remember, like the 7 stages or something, I put them into a little song, and then if I ever got stuck, I'd just sing the song in my head and write it down.
You'll be like,
it worked
on
every
the first
time.
day of Christmas, I met Jon Snow. Just repeat that part over and over.
Well, but that's honestly, singing is the oldest mnemonic technique. You know, you think the Iliad and the Odyssey, they were sung, they were recited. You add, you know, tone, and you add rhyming and rhythm and meter. You know, you add, you know, all this different stuff together that makes it more memorable. It makes it more sticky in your brain to you know, have different things for it to hook onto. The ABCs we learn as kids, and we sing it to the tune of Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, you know?
Yep.
I still know the French days of the week because my French teacher told me them to the EastEnders theme tune.
Huh.
So that means nothing to you, does it?
Wow. EastEnders is a soap.
Yeah.
Okay. Someone gets murdered every week, and people fighting in a pub, and it's like, a real life representation. It
is like my biggest guilty pleasure in life, and I love it so much.
Good for you.
I'll have to check this out. You'll have to put a link in the description.
Also, Danny Dyer's in it, so he's just awesome.
He is.
Okay. Have either of you two heard of the World Memory Championship?
Yeah, I've heard of it.
I've not, but I can imagine it's a thing.
Oh, you did know about it. I told you about it. You've forgotten.
Oh, damn it. Is that why I got disqualified?
Yes. You're in the competition. I was like, remember.
It's tomorrow.
Remember where you are.
Every year they put together this championship to try to find out who has the best memory and who's, you know, can remember the most strings or the most random numbers in like a set of random binary digits. Or, you know, they'll give them a bunch of names and addresses or something, or they'll give them a bunch of just, you know, non-repeating numbers or something, and they have to remember as many as they can. And one of the events is memorizing decks of playing cards that are randomly shuffled. And one of the world champions, Ben Pridmore, last I heard, he was able to memorize 36 decks of cards in an hour.
Oh.
And I think the champion for memorizing one deck of cards was it was like 20 something seconds. It was this insanely just like they're flipping through them so fast, but they're memorizing it as they go.
What the fuck?
This is where it gets interesting, though, is that this book, Moonwalking with Einstein, the author, he was a journalist who was trying to figure out who the smartest person in the world was, and he ended up at the World Memory Championship. He goes to this event and he starts talking to the competitors, and they start telling him that none of them are savants. They don't have special memories. They're just using certain techniques to do this that anyone can do. And so one of them was saying that he wanted to teach Britney Spears how to do this so that basically he could show that anyone can master these tricks and stuff. The author was like, well, I don't know Britney Spears, but would you be willing to teach me? I have kind of a crap memory. Maybe you could teach me. And so he started learning, practicing about 30 minutes to an hour a day. And he wound up winning the U.S. World Memory Championship. He didn't expect to win, but he just mastered these techniques and just dominated.
That's insane.
fMRI scans of the competitors showed that they weren't savants. There was nothing unusual about their brain size. There was nothing, you know, abnormal about how their brains appeared. But they did find that their brains were using a different region that was associated with spatial memory and navigation.
Wow.
So how are they doing this?
One of the techniques I've heard for memorizing, like, you know, like a list of objects or something, is to kind of like go through a little story in your head and like imagine things. So imagine your you know, if you're playing like the shopping game where it's like I went to the shop and I bought an apple, a banana, a cherry, a dog, that sort of thing. You kind of like, you have a picture in your head and you go through the picture, and so you imagine, like, say maybe a woman and she's holding an apple and then a banana and then this, and you kind of like go through the picture and the story in your head, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things I've heard.
That's actually an aspect of the memory palace technique, which I'm going to cover in just a second.
Sorry.
But when Ben Pridmore does, or I'll cover the memory palace first. So this goes back to Simonides coming out of the palace and trying to remember where people were seated. And if you're trying to practice mnemonic techniques and honing your memory, one of the best ways to do it is to find things that are memorable, that are sticky, that are easy to remember. So like if right now, if you look out your window and you just see a random white car drive by, just a random 4-door white car, nothing out of the ordinary, you're not going to remember it most of the time. But if, on the other hand, this car was, let's say it's a red convertible limousine, and standing in the limo is, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, and he's got his shirt ripped off, and, there's some chimpanzee that's like wrapped around his leg and it's like humping it. Okay?
I saw that last night. What's your point?
You will never forget that moment for the rest of your life because it is so out of the ordinary.
Mm-hmm.
It is provocative. It is like mind-blowing. The more insane, funny, sexual, graphic, violent, intense, like the more emotions and senses that you're able to pin to a particular thing, the more memorable you can make it. So let's say that you're trying to memorize a shopping list, a banana, an apple, an orange, whatever. If you start to think of like, okay, you walk home and you have a particular region that you're very familiar with. So you call it your memory palace, and you walk through on, of course, a route through your house or through, it could be a school or wherever that you're familiar with. You walk up to the front door and you see, like, right as you're coming in, you step knee deep in this giant tub of applesauce, and you're like, oh no. And like, as you step into the applesauce, there's, I don't know, let's say Mr. T is taking a bath in it, and he looks up and he's like, pity the fool. And maybe you also needed to get some black tea or something. Or that's not meant to be a racist joke. It was just tea, green tea. It doesn't matter. But let's say it's Mr. T. So you suddenly, you're able to.
You're in too deep.
In too deep in the applesauce.
Yeah.
So let's say that you have
deep in the black.
You suddenly, then you move on to the next thing. You walk inside, and as you walk inside, there's that, the annoying orange from YouTube, and he's standing there, and he's just going, he's like singing a particular tune, and he's like, nah, 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 and he says something, and you can start to have different things that you're placing that are so much more memorable that then as you walk back through this, you remember each step to the next leads to the next, and each one you're associating like the smell of like apple juice and like the sound of your foot squishing through the apples and stuff, and maybe you feel, Mr. T getting angry and he punches you in the face or something. Like, the more stuff that you can associate with a memory, the more likely you are to be able to, retain it and then recall it later.
Right.
So when memorizing 36 decks of cards, the World Memory Championship is kind of like an arms race. So rather than just having, like, let's say I pull up one card and I'm like, okay, the Queen of Diamonds, that's like Queen Elizabeth or something. Okay, well, then you can start putting like Queen Elizabeth in your palace. But what if you want to get more elaborate? What if you want to memorize cards faster? Well, then you can take a card and you can say it doesn't just have one thing associated with it. It has a noun, an action, and an object. So Queen Elizabeth riding on a horse or something, or whatever. And then maybe the second one is Brad Pitt sitting on a tricycle. And then like the third one, the third card, is I don't know, the brown M&M, and he is eating a cucumber. Well, then if you get these 3 cards in a row, then you can
think about a lot.
Well, if you get these 3 cards in a row, you take the noun from the first one, the action from the second one, and then the object from the third one. So you have Queen Elizabeth sitting on a cucumber.
Got it. That's smart.
So if you put this stuff then you can create weird, crazy, memorable images from all of them.
I don't want that to be memorable.
But it takes work ahead of time. Like ahead of time, you have to actually solidify these memories for every single one of these cards, what each one is. And it comes down to people with the best memories are the most creative. How quickly can you conjure up a creative, crazy image that's far out there? And then you can start, pinning these things to other objects and then putting them throughout your memory palace. And then you can go through and memorize hundreds of cards in a row, and you have super memorable things that are very sticky in your memory that you're able to hold on to. There's different things, different effects. Like it's so much more effective than rote learning, which is just where you just repeat it over and over and over and over and over. You're just trying to cram something into your head. Whereas if you give it something to stick to and some hooks for it to hang on to and something more tangible, more memorable, you're more likely to be able to retain it. This gets into the notion of the Baker-Baker paradox, where if I were to tell you, Steve, you have to remember that there's a dude and his name is Baker. And I tell you, Rachel, you have to remember that there's a guy and his profession is baker. He is a baker. He bakes things. Rachel's going to have a much easier time remembering it because Steve's Baker is just an arbitrary name. It's some dude. He could be anything. Whereas Rachel's is someone who, like, he makes bread and he probably has like a big white hat and is covered in flour and he smells good and stuff. And he's got this, mustache and he's, baking all these delightful goodies to sell.
He's got really rosy
and so, yeah, you have more tangible stuff, more memories, more things to associate it with. And so it's more memorable. But you still have to put in some amount of effort and focus in order to make it memorable. So this is kind of getting into like what makes things stick in our memory.
So you asked me to remember a person called Baker, right?
Yeah.
Is it wrong that using the points you've just made, I'm still associating it with someone that bakes?
No, you can.
Because that's how I'm going to remember it better. I can already tell.
Yeah, but that's how you remember it better. It's not just by some arbitrary thing. It's by associating it with that. So then if let's say that you meet someone else and their last name is Johnson. Well, if you think of just a name, it's not easy to remember. But if you think of a penis, it's probably going to stick in your head.
I was thinking Johnson & Johnson, the shampoo brand, but you're my straight to Crocs. Straight to Cox of you two. Like, Jesus Christ.
I was thinking like a father and son, and the guy is like, "Hi, I'm John," and then there's this little kid, and he's like, "I'm his son." I was thinking of something cute. You ruined it. You really ruined it.
Speaking of Cox, though, this really segues great into the next section, which is the using the technique, the memory technique of chunking. Which is not sexual at all.
Mom, I'm sorry again.
Go on.
But Rachel, you kind of touched on this just a little bit earlier where you talked about when you're memorizing strings of numbers, breaking them into different chunks of numbers that are associated. So rather than just memorizing 1 and then a 9 and then a 7 and then an 8, you think like 1, 9 and you're like, all right, my 19th birthday, I did this. And then, you put the numbers together in these sequences that you recognize. And so let's say that you need to remember, 1492. You're like, all right, 1492. That's Columbus. That's when he did his thing. And so like you put all this different stuff into things that are memorable to you. Maybe like, this is the current month, or that's my birthday, or that's the time that this happened. You find different associations with numbers, and then you make them more memorable. There's also a system where if you're memorizing numbers, I think it's called the Master's system, where you can assign certain letters to different numbers, and then you just fill in vowels and make words out of them, and then create sentences and stuff so you can remember a long string of numbers. But it takes time up front. It takes time and effort and focus to derive the system, become good at learning and memorizing it, and then become creative at putting it all together. It's not something that you can just passively increase your memory by like playing some mind game on your app. Like you said, doing a lot of crossword puzzles makes you good at doing crossword puzzles. It doesn't make your overall memory better. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
There is one area, one aspect.
I was just going to say, so really...
Yeah, go ahead.
It almost feels like cheating. It's not, but I'm just tempted to say it is. Because it's not... You're not retaining the thing. You're retaining concepts that represent the thing. So it's like, are they in your memory? It's like, no, you're memorizing something else that you've associated to it. And because it's so weird and wacky, you can recall it. So the result's the same, and that is that it looks like your memory is fantastic, but really you're not remembering them at all. So is it that you have a good memory, or is it that you just understand your own brain and you know how to utilize it?
It's the latter. It's 100% cheating.
It's fantastic, though. I mean, if it gets the result, that's all that matters. But
yeah.
I guess it isn't.
But there's one aspect.
Memory. Yeah.
There is one aspect of it, though, that I think is connected to direct memory, and that's that the more that we focus, if we're multitasking and we're listening to an audiobook while we're also trying to focus on a conversation, we're probably going to miss out on a large percentage of both. Whereas if we're really honed in and focused on it and present and mindful in the moment, you know, it's like we have to remember to remember. If you just hear a bunch of names, you're probably not going to remember them. But if you really focus in on it and hone in on it and try to think about it, you can use these techniques or not. But just the very act of trying to remember and being mindful in the moment, having this kind of enhanced memory through forced mindfulness, definitely does help us to retain more and to create more experiences that are vivid and that then can act as hooks for other memories to stick to.
Is that why, like, I learn things better and like memorize things better when I actually like sit down and make notes and underline things rather than when I just listen to them? Because when I just listen to something, I don't take anything in. But if I actually like read something, I take more in. And then if I actually like underline and make notes on something as I'm reading it, I take like it all in.
Yeah, I mean, and it comes down to how badly do you want to retain it?
Yeah.
You know, if you're going to teach this material, you're probably going to spend more time going over it and rehearsing it and learning it and trying to find a different way to reword it and to interpret it and to present it. And maybe you're going to create graphic visualizations of a topic. And like the more that you're doing that stuff, it's like neurons that fire together, wire together. The more times that you recall something, the more times that you associate something with other things, like the easier it is for these memories to really take root in your mind and to last. But if you just kind of hear it once and it just kind of disappears, well, it's not gonna be sticky. It's gonna disappear.
Is that why you keep saying "put your poo in me" so we remember to put our poo in you?
Man, one episode about fecal transplants and it's all over.
Wait, we had an episode on fecal transplants? I can't remember that. You'd think I would remember that, but yeah.
It was the episode on like antibiotic resistance, wasn't it?
Mm.
I remember.
Yeah. I remember.
You remember?
So there's a couple of aspects to this that I really want people to take away from it. And one of them is that when oftentimes we think of people who are extremely intelligent or extremely bright, extremely smart, most people, like, they didn't start off that way. Their brain is just the same as pretty much everyone else's. There are some slight changes and differences in IQ, but a lot of it comes down to how we learn, the techniques that we use, the methods that we use, and oftentimes even the most brilliant savants at like memorizing stuff have a couple disability. Whereas if anyone can take these techniques and win the World Memory Championship, and people can really focus and be mindful and take in new information and make it memorable to themselves, and then use it to learn more information better and faster, we're all at a position that we can enhance our memory and our abilities and our knowledge. So this shift to a growth mindset is super crucial. It's super key. When I was about 17, I really felt like a dumb kid. I didn't know a lot, and I just immersed myself in learning. And life is a constant journey of that. But realizing that we can grow and that we do have the ability to not just learn more, but learn how to learn more faster and how to retain more it's extremely empowering. And there's a lot that we can do with it.
Yeah.
And the second aspect I want as kind of a takeaway is this notion that our lives, there's a difference between experienced memory and psychological memory. So the more memorable things that you experience in your lifetime, the longer it feels. So if every single day is the same routine, you'll think back on the last 6 months and it's just kind of one big blur. There's nothing really that stands out, nothing memorable. But if you do like 1,000 memorable things in a day, you'll be like, oh my God, that was just this morning that happened. Like this day has just been so long and amazing and all this stuff happened. And your life feels longer. It psychologically feels like you've done more. And so it's in a way you're extending your life. So while a few episodes ago I talked about can we live forever and extend our life, well, this is the most surefire way that you can do it, is by making your life more memorable, making every experience count.
But also don't forget to take days off.
Yeah, and hopefully take days off and do something that's worth remembering.
I think I've missed your point. So if you're able to remember more, how does that make you live longer?
It makes your life feel longer.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
So, like, you know, like, imagine... So, like, when you're on holiday and you go do, like, a million things, and you visit, like, 2 museums in a day, and you have lunch out somewhere, and you go eat out somewhere in the evening, and then you go see a show in the evening, then you get home, and you're like, oh my god, like, I can't believe that was only this morning that we went to such and such a museum. And it feels like it lasts forever because you've done so many, like, amazing, memorable, fun things in a day. Whereas, like, if you sit at home every day and you watch TV and you just, like, binge Netflix and play PlayStation, and then, like, you do that for a week, and so you're like, really? That was last weekend that happened? Like, oh, it just feels like this morning. Because you don't really have anything new and exciting, and that's the point. Oh, yeah. Kind of.
Yeah. Another important thing to take away is, like, a lot of times people they look at people, they're like, oh, they're so smart. These chess grandmasters can memorize all these board positions. Well, there was a study in 1973 by Chase and Simon that showed that chess grandmasters, they were able to memorize board positions better than novices when they were shown, like, you know, actual board positions. But when they took the board pieces and they moved them a little bit to create a scenario that would never happen in an actual chess game, they fared about the same as amateurs. They weren't really able, they didn't have these superior memories. They weren't really able to memorize it at a better rate. It's that they were looking at the boards in different chunks, and they were looking at certain patterns that they had been exposed to over and over and over again. They were recalling from memory games that they had experienced, or things or concepts that they had taken in over the course of their chess career. But when it came to their actual memory, this is stuff that you can gather, you can gain, you can learn. And it comes through experiences.
Do you know if you can increase your processing speed? Because when it comes to chess players, there's a memory aspect. And as you've just described, they can learn all of the positions on the board by using these various techniques. But what makes them so special, and why most chess grandmasters, they tend to be recognized when they're young, is because their processing speed is just out of this world. If you take Magnus Carlsen, he absolutely insane. He was like 13 years old. He was getting distracted on, like, national television while beating a grandmaster. His processing speed is not. He didn't do any techniques. This is natural to him. He is naturally very, very. He's got incredible processing speed. Can you learn that?
I think you can increase it by just repeating what you're doing many times and, like, creating more connections between the neurons. So you know that neurons fire when you reach a certain kind of electrical energy level, right? So the more neurons you have coming into this one neuron that's trying to fire, the quicker it goes, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So basically, the more you do something, the more connections you make, the quicker it fires.
Like muscle memory, right?
Well, not just that, but the neurons become insulated with myelin.
Yes, yes.
And as they become myelinated, then they actually fire quicker. And so as you build habits, like, that's one of the things with, like, muscle memory and things that you're exposed to over and over and over again. These pathways become myelinated and they actually fire quicker.
I see.
So to some extent, you can increase that.
Yeah.
Do you think somebody teaching themselves... Okay, so let's just say you two now, you wanted to teach yourselves to be able to process as fast as Magnus Carlsen. Do you think you would be able to do it with techniques? Or do you think there's just too much of a genetic aspect in that one example? Or
I think it kind of depends on how much of a genetic aspect there is, but there are other things you can do. So, for example, exercise tends to there's a protein called BDNF, and I think it's a brain-derived neurotropic factor, if I'm right on that. And it's basically a protein that it'll stimulate growth and differentiation of the synapses and neurons in your brain. And it's also called miracle grow for the brain. Well, there's been a number of studies that have shown that its expression is promoted through exercise. And so if you're exercising a lot and you're exercising regularly, you can actually increase the rate of your neurons and synapses growing and differentiating. Because our brain's neurogenesis, it doesn't stop at childhood. It continues throughout your life, and you can actually increase the rate.
I'd imagine then there's like
neuroplasticity.
synthetic supplements you can take as well.
Yeah.
If you want to cheat a bit, I'd imagine.
There's got to be drugs,
Caffeine.
etc.
Yeah.
Because we know, for example, if you want to build muscle, take steroids. They work. They work insanely well. There's studies where people take steroids and do nothing versus people that work out, doing all the right things, eating the right diet, and the person doing nothing will put on substantially more muscle mass. I imagine
they also get roid rage and go crazy.
Well, if they take estrogen blockers, they'll be fine. Believe it or not, I've got friends that take steroids, so I.
Yeah, Steve, friends.
Well, you can look at my physique. There's no way I'm taking them. I'm too calm as well. But it's an interesting look. Like, you have drugs like modafinil, which is something I take on occasion. That has incredible effects on your mind.
Yeah.
You know, the best 5 minutes of the day where you're really productive. Do you want that?
Yeah.
Do you want that for 7 hours? Try modafinil. So I imagine there's other things that can play into helping you be in a mindset where you can learn more and perhaps even retain more.
Yeah. Well, and there's a lot of people who will use drugs like God, why am I blanking on it?
There's
for like ADD.
Yeah, Adderall and stuff. What is that and how does it work?
Adderall's it's very similar to modafinil, but Adderall's got a few other effects. We'll have to
dedicate an entire episode to that because we're running out of time.
Oh,
we
yeah,
will.
Sure,
Absolutely.
sorry.
Yeah.
But the point in all of this is that if you're daunted by experts, or you feel like you were born stupid, or you're not up to par, like, don't lose heart. There is a lot of stuff that you can do, and there's a lot of techniques, and like, the more that you grow and that you expose yourself to a wide variety of topics, the more interesting things you'll have then to be able to overcome this paradox of learning and find little things that you can stick and hook on your memories to.
I wanted to add a note to that, actually. Sorry I thought you were concluding. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but for what it's worth, when I left school at 16, I couldn't read properly. I'd never read a book. I didn't pass with any grades whatsoever, and yet on paper I just looked like an absolute fool, and to an extent I was. But that didn't stop me. I could learn more and delve into topics that interested me. And now I would say I'm at least average. But it kind of represents the point that you're making there, that no matter your condition, no matter where you are, just learn for the sake of learning. Enjoy it.
The other thing I'd add is that, like, I know a lot of people with very good memory, and I know a lot of people who are very intelligent, and they're not always in the same groups. I find that the people who I kind of have a lot more respect for, the people who try their best and come up with their own opinions and try and think for themselves instead of just regurgitating what they've heard elsewhere. So I feel like school can put you at a real disadvantage if you don't have a great memory, but in the real world, it's being able to think critically for yourself that really helps. So, yeah.
We'll have to do an entire episode on different intelligences.
It has to be both. You have to have experiences in order to process and to think critically about them.
Yeah.
And you also have to be able to, to have a way to think critically about, it's both.
Yeah.
But on that note, we will be back next week when I believe Steve is going to be taking next week, because Rachel did 2 in a row.
She did.
And so,
what a legend.
Yeah.
Thanks for that, Rachel.
And now I'm ill.
Oh, get well soon, Rachel.
You guys just overworked me and now I'm ill.
We did.
Aww.
No, I'm kidding. Dan just gave me his cold.
Hopefully you won't remember that.
Remember what?
Take care, guys. We will see you.
Last thing, Rachel.
Yes.
Do you remember the 2 names that Thomas was getting us to remember earlier on?
You mean Baker and Baker?
Baker and Baker? What was the one afterwards?
There was one afterwards.
Yeah, there was.
Lulu Galactica.
Johnson.
Yeah, you did it.
Oh, Johnson.
Fantastic.
We will see you guys in the next episode.
I'm glad you remembered, because I didn't.
This has been an absolute blast, and now we want you to join in the conversation over on the Here and How Facebook and Twitter pages, or follow us on Pinterest and Instagram if you just want some of the dankest of sciencey memes. If you like one of our particular styles, check out each of our YouTube channels: Rachel Oates, Rationality Rules by Stephen Woodford, and Holy Kool-Aid by me, Thomas Westbrook. To find all of our episodes, show notes, contact information, and more, warp on over to our home base, thehereandhow.com. If you enjoyed this episode and want us to succeed in spreading the love of science, you can help us out by giving us a 5-star review on iTunes or Stitcher. And to all our friends and family listening, thank you for spending this episode with us. We'll be back to explore another exciting big idea next week. Now go create something magnificent.